Good evening and welcome to Chicago Tonight Latino Voices. I'm Joanna Hernandez. On the show tonight,
we need to go assess the situation.
Chicago's delegation to the border returns. They share their takeaways from the trip. One-on-one with the Consul General of Mexico in Chicago following a hurricane that leaves at least 27 dead in Acapulco.
How clean is my water? How clean is the air that I'm breathing?
Inequities and the effects of climate change in Lake County.
It's not only a celebration of life, it's a celebration of our community as well.
And Carrera de los Muertos kicks off this weekend in celebration of Day of the Dead. Up next, members of Chicago's delegation to the southern border, what they have learned right after this.
Chicago Tonight, Latino Voices, is made possible in part by the support of these donors.
We'll get to that conversation with the city delegation to Texas in a few minutes, but first, Hurricane Otis struck Acapulco, Guerrero yesterday, leaving at least 27 dead and 4 people missing, according to the Ministry of Migrants and International Affairs of Guerrero. The Chicago area is home to the second largest population of Guerrero people in the world, just after Acapulco, living a troublesome reality for Illinoisans with relatives in their homeland. Joining us now to discuss this on the local level and more is Consul General of Mexico in Chicago, Reina Torres Mendivil. Thank you for joining us. Now, I want to start off. Hurricane Otis has intensified from a tropical storm into a Category 5 hurricane, the most severe category in just 12 hours. What are you hearing from people here in Chicago? How are their families? What can you tell us?
It was a very unusual circumstance, the way this developed, but the tragedy is that a lot of people were affected in Mexico. And as you mentioned, one of the largest community of people from Guerrero is here in this area, here in Chicago. We're talking about 350,000 persons just in this area. Naturally, right now, they're desperately looking for their relatives. So the challenges that they have to overcome back in Mexico are many. The communications have been reestablished little by little. By now, there is telephone service because it was suspended for a while, same with electricity, but the services are coming back little by little, as I said. So the Red Cross is helping the persons to locate their relatives in Mexico. And of course, the hometown associations that we have here in Chicago are also helping persons looking for friends and relatives.
Do you get calls at the council?
Yes, we have. And we are referring them either with the Red Cross, that is, they are handling the database of persons affected. But the situation is really, really sad. And I know that we have a very good-hearted community here. The solidarity was shown immediately. Right now, since, as you know, in this kind of disasters, natural tragedies, it's complicated. They have to reestablish communications, as I mentioned. So far, I think that the wisest thing we all can do is to donate to the Red Cross, the Mexican Red Cross, so they can channel those resources.
That's what I was about to ask. In a situation like this with so much destruction, what takes priority?
It's very difficult to donate in kind right now. People may want to, send clothes or food, but since the access is very limited, that right now the Mexican army is working in reestablishing, opening the highways to have access to the communities. And, big cities like Acapulco were incommunicated for a couple of hours, some hours. But right now, the communication has been reestablished. You can imagine in the remote areas how complicated it is. So this is not a time to donate in kind. This is a time to look for the Red Cross, the Mexican Red Cross, and help that way if you want.
Well, thank you for that information. I want to switch topics. Speaking of immigration, how would you describe the climate we're in right now when it comes to this topic? We're seeing a lot of pushback here in Chicago to the thousands of migrants being sent from the border by Governor Abbott.
It's a very complex situation. What I always say is that if you want to find a one-answer solution, you are wrong. You're mistaken from the beginning. This is a very complex situation, and first of all, it cannot be resolved by just one country. You have to look at it regionally because it doesn't start in Mexico or at the border. People may find that, they have these immigration flows here in Chicago, and they may think that, they appear at the Mexican border, and one day they are sent here. It's not as simple as that. It originates in the southern part of the continent. So we have to look at what's going on in all those countries that they travel through to come here to Chicago. The second is that if you think that it's just a matter of law enforcement, that's not the answer either. You need to look into the root causes of immigration, and they have to do with climate change. They have to do with the political and economic situation in many countries. So the answer has to be, multi-purpose, multi-answer, not just one side.
Now, with this recent influx of new arrivals, the majority are from Venezuela. Would you say that you've seen an increase of Mexicans still trying to migrate here?
There are migrants from many countries trying to come here. Haiti is one of the other nationalities, and Cuba is one of the other nationalities. What I find really encouraging is that there is an impulse for multilateral conversations. I know that the Biden administration has engaged in conversations with the Venezuela government, and I think this is a good thing. Some repatriation flights have been arranged already from persons that came to the U.S. with the hope to get asylum, and they know that their processes will not be successful. So at this time, they are, in the position to go back to their countries. I think that's encouraging, at least to have these conversations, to work with each other, and to make sure that all work together to protect the dignity and to address the human aspects of this phenomenon.
Now, we only have a couple seconds, so I do want to ask, you smiled when you heard about Day of the Dead. Do you celebrate?
That's one of the dearest celebrations that we have. And of course, let's all celebrate the Day of the Dead. It's beautiful. And it's a good time to remember your friends and family that pass away. So it should be celebration of life.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. Thank you.
Our thanks to Reina Torres Medevil. Up next, some Lake County residents are feeling the effects of climate change more accurately than others. We explain right after this. Lake County is lush with forest preserves, parks, and natural spaces. But many of its Latino residents say they don't feel like those spaces are welcoming to them. An analysis by the nonprofit Brushwood Center at Ryerson Woods found not only do Latinos feel excluded from assessing Lake County's natural assets, they're also overburdened by the effects of industry and environmental injustices. Producer Erica Gunderson caught up with the group last month and has the story.
Lake County for me is home.
Nestled into the northeasternmost corner of Illinois, much of Lake County is wealthy, verdant, and suburban. But some towns in Lake County are both deeply industrial and deeply Latino, like the one Celeste Flores grew up in.
Park City, Illinois, which is in the middle of Waukegan and Gurnee. It's about 8,000 community members. It's a working class. Majority identify as Hispanic, Latino.
Today, Flores is an environmental activist and board member at the health and nature equity nonprofit Brushwood Center. But she says it wasn't until adulthood that she began to understand the inequities she experienced as a child.
Growing up, I didn't really think about going out on a trip. Now realizing that we have all these forest preserves and all these other spaces that we could have maybe traveled to, I never considered how clean is my water, how clean is the air that I'm breathing. It definitely makes me reconsider where I spend my time outside, if I want to spend my time outside, or if I'd rather find spaces that in my eyes are cleaner because they don't have this industrial pollution, but that would mean having to drive further from where I live.
Brushwood Center Executive Director Catherine Game says though Lake County is full of natural spaces, the Latino residents they work with say they feel shut out of them.
What we heard over and over again were many of the same barriers that folks face. So transportation, lack of materials or access to content in Spanish or in the languages that they speak, not feeling welcomed in spaces, not feeling a sense of belonging. When the pandemic hit and we saw the many ways that these same communities and partners who were facing barriers to accessing nature and accessing the basics like clean air and water also were the same communities who faced barriers to accessing healthcare, to accessing the emergency resources that were needed during that time. All of this is taking place in the context of a changing climate. And we are already seeing increasing temperatures, increasing rainfall. This summer, we saw the tornadoes coming through our communities. We saw the wildfire smoke. We also know that there are huge health implications to increasing heat and temperature. Even though you can kind of distinguish them into individual buckets, they're very interconnected.
So the Brushwood Center decided to take a deeper look. In June, the organization released a report that combines federal and local data with independent research. The report found Lake County residents face significant race-based disparities in health outcomes, environmental quality, and access to nature.
There is gorgeous nature in Lake County, but we know also from the data that there's still a lot of folks who face barriers to accessing outdoor spaces, and that those barriers really fall very much so along demographic lines. So you see the same communities, mostly Black and brown communities, that experience, lower life expectancy, higher housing costs, especially in Northeast Lake County, where there's a history of industrial development alongside housing discrimination and other racial inequities. And so all of this means there is a legacy of toxins that are still being dealt with today.
Flores says the report's findings on access to nature and health inequities align with her experience as a Lake County native.
I think we enjoy nature and try to go outside, but sometimes don't know the industry that's surrounding us. We have the beautiful dunes that have been restored, and then we have access to Lake Michigan. But then along that, we have the coal plants. We come across Superfund sites, right? Sites that have been abandoned. 1 in 3 children in Waukegan have asthma or asthma-like symptoms, and it's something that I had seen in my own family.
And Flores and Games say their hope is the report will help spur action in Lake County at all levels.
If you work on solutions that kind of address them all, you're hitting multiple points at once.
How do we make sure that now that we have this report, and how do we all move together when it comes to community members that, can help with this, with organizations, and then with our elected offices. So I think that we can find those answers within the community.
For Chicago Tonight, Latino Voices, this is Erica Gunderson.
You'll find more on that Brushwood Center report on our website. More than 19,000 migrants have been sent to Chicago from the southern border in the last year. More than 3,100 are currently sleeping at police stations across the city and O'Hare Airport. The ongoing crisis has strained city and community organization resources, as well as frustrated community members who have long called for access to those same resources. A delegation of local leaders and community groups recently visited the border, and some are here joining us today to share what they have learned. Those are Alderman William Hall of the 6th Ward, Dulce Quintero, Acting Secretary of the Illinois Department of Human Services, Ellen Miller, a pro bono manager for the National Immigrant Justice Center, and Cristina Pacion Zayas, the City of Chicago's first Deputy Chief of Staff. Thank you all for joining us today. Now, Alderman Hall, to my understanding, all of you have toured Texas cities of El Paso, San Antonio, McAllen, and Brownsville, which are points of departure for people traveling to Chicago. What is the reality like at the border?
Well, at the border, the reality is thousands of people are coming from all across the world seeking asylum. They're coming into this country. The reality is they are going to base camps that are ran by Border Patrol, Homeland Security. And the reality is you have children with no parents that are just left due to parents dying in the plight to get asylum. And what you also see is compassion. You have a city, El Paso and San Antonio, who are embracing our asylum-seeking brothers and sisters, and they're getting the assistance that they need from the federal government.
And what you saw, was it shocking to you? It's one thing seeing it on camera, right, and then actually seeing it in person.
Yeah, once you look into the eyes of a child that no longer will see their parents, it really does shatter your heart. And what you also see is the heart of those who really want to help. And so, to be honest with you, what keeps me up at night, what keeps me motivated during the day, is to make space for those who are here already seeking asylum, and then those who live in Chicago since the day they were born.
Of course. And Pacion Zayas, what did you learn from their trip that you didn't know before?
I think the thing that stood out to me the most is that the operation at the border is really about processing people. Many of the folks that are involved in that work, whether it is the federal government or the non-governmental agencies and organizations, it's about volume. It's about this is the first stop and nobody is there more than 24 to 72 hours. So it is really just about helping people get from that initial point to either their intermediary or final destination, whereas Chicago is one of those locations. And therefore, our operation is a very different kind of approach because we are working essentially on resettlement, which is a lot more comprehensive and resource intensive.
And the follow-up question that I want to ask, what can the city administration put into action now?
So with respect to what we gleaned from this particular work is not only that our operation is different and that there isn't an anchor community here that can help buffer and share the responsibility, we have to join forces with the border cities, with the border states to really come together and advocate at the federal level with respect to understanding that there's a different type of funding formula that needs to be applied here and that this is ultimately a federal responsibility. And so on the advocacy tip, we are joining forces with those cities on the border as well as interior cities to lift up the fact that the investments that need to be made have to be radically different than what has been proposed. We are heartened to hear that President Biden is proposing $1.4 billion for states and cities for this type of work, but we need it to be closer to $5 to $10 billion. With respect to how we are welcoming people, we are continuing to do what we initially always said we were going to do, and that is to resettle, to help people get onto a path of self-sufficiency, self-determination, and self-resilience.
Okay, and Quintero, I want to go to you. Chicago officials, including Mayor Johnson, have continued to call on the state for support, even though they have said there are no additional funds to support the city through the crisis. What more can the state do?
So we are in constant communication with the city, very close, working, coordinating with the city around wraparound services to ensure that we are responding to this humanitarian crisis. This is such an unfortunate crisis that we're having to respond. We're doing the best that we can with the limited resources, and we're continuing to communicate at the federal government for additional resources. But please know that we are communicating, working closely with the city, and it's just unfortunate that we have this level of humanitarian crisis. Families, children, individuals seeking asylum.
Alderman Hall, what does the border have that Chicago doesn't in order to handle the crisis?
Well, what they have at the border, let's start with El Paso, right? They've declared a state of emergency. This city is under emergency declaration. It's gotten the ear of Washington, D.C. There's millions of dollars that allow them to do this operation. I was talking to the mayor of San Antonio, same thing. He leans over and I ask him one simple question. How are you able to afford, even though San Antonio is an interior city, El Paso is a border city, the government funds their operations to get people to come to Chicago to go to court. Asylum seekers are treated with dignity and respect. But again, when you have a federal government that has yielded and opened up the checkbook for them to do this type of work, and then to see Chicago is using everything that it can. And we're grateful for the partnership with the state. But it's a difference. It's an inadequate funding equation. And what we need is an investment in human life and an investment in Chicagoans. And then we also need the President of the United States to follow through. Pledging does not matter. We don't need a pledge. We need promises made, promises fulfilled.
Not to mention all the money that's also being spent from people's pockets, just to the people who are volunteering. Ellen, I want to go to you. In a recent post about the trip, you wrote, Chicago is not only a welcoming city for migrants, but a place where people hope to resettle and build lives with dignity and security. After touring the border, are there initiatives that can possibly work here in Chicago?
Of course, and we're already doing that. So with the city and the state and with other legal partners, nonprofit service providers, we are providing, right now we have asylum clinics, so pro se asylum clinics helping those asylum seekers. We started that with Pro Bono Council in the city. We have a fabulous pro bono network here, very active and eager. We, the city and the state and other legal service providers, including the National Immigrant Justice Center, are starting workshops for temporary protected status and for people to get their work authorizations. We're grateful that USCIS has offered to also come and facilitate that and make sure that that process moves as quickly as possible. And we hope that also will continue, that effort from the federal government will continue with asylum seekers. We also saw, though, on the border is that there's so many different legal postures that people can come in, and that the Border Patrol and DHS, Department of Homeland Security, has discretion to release people in different ways. When they can release them with parole, parole grants work authorization. Right now, though, the federal government is not issuing parole. They're not getting work authorization when they come here. The government can do that to facilitate that and our internal efforts. So yes, legal service providers with the city and the state and other nonprofits are providing asylum workshops. We're providing temporary protected status workshops, work authorization, and also next week we're going to kick off something that's called Primeros Pasos, or First Steps clinics, which are looking to give basic orientation for change of address, for change of court venues, and really just orienting the people to where are they in the process, and what rights do they have. I will just say, and I think my colleagues said this, and they know this too, seeking asylum is a right.
That's right.
People have a right to seek asylum and to be here safely and live with dignity. And it's also the federal government's responsibility to open an avenue that is fair and efficient for these asylum seekers. It is other governments and our civil society's obligation to receive these people with dignity, security, respect, and to make sure that they're integrated in our communities, the communities that also have a long, rich history of migration.
We're really trying to work together here.
Yeah.
We are.
Because it almost seems like at one point there was a lot of pointing fingers.
Yeah.
Right.
And Alderman Hall, I want to go to you. You know, what would you say right now are the calls for federal? What does that federal support look like?
Well, number one, we need a common sense border policy. Without a common sense border policy, what we're seeing is the chaos and the frustration at the border. Thousands of people are crossing the border daily. And so again, without a common sense border policy, without the process being outlined, without the lawyers to secure the rights of those who are crossing the border, this is an international issue in which the city of Chicago has taken on this with big shoulders, but at the end of the day, if Congress does not act, this can turn to even more chaos. And without the absence of funding, let's be clear about this. The city of Chicago, number one, we're in the midst of a budget season. Our mayor has put forth opening up mental clinics, check. Our mayor has put forth making sure that young people have jobs year round. Our mayor is looking to bring home Chicago where everybody who crosses the border, crosses into Chicago, has a place to live, children have jobs, and mental health clinics. But without federal funding, he's putting in jeopardy the work that we've been working so hard to get done here in our city.
So that federal funding is really necessary.
It's essential.
Now, Pasiones Zayas, I want to go to you. Now, how will this information you gathered be used at this point, moving forward? Is there a report that's being prepared?
We have a briefing that we are giving to the mayor, but ultimately the recommendations are translating into action. That was our goal, right? We wanted to go to the source. We had to see for ourselves the process by which people are coming to Chicago. We can't ultimately understand an issue that we can't see firsthand, but also to build the relationships and partnerships with border cities so we can have tighter coordination. You know, I had mentioned before in previous interviews that we had only been receiving manifests for about a third of the buses. That can be detrimental to our planning, and it undermines our ability to forecast and figure out what type of shelter we need and what type of resources we can wrap around people. Now that we forged these relationships, we are getting more manifests. They have offered us their playbook for their multi-agency resource center, which we are going to be standing up soon again, so that we can have tighter, efficient processing and getting people on that pathway to self-sufficiency.
Well, thank you all. That's all we have. I know we can talk about this all day, but thank you so much. Our thanks to all of you for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
And
you.
we're back with more, but first, a look at the weather. It's going to be a colorful day in Pilsen on Saturday. Over 6,000 people are expected to come together to honor their late loved ones in a 5K race. Carrera de los Muertos is celebrating its Sweet 16 this year ahead of Day of the Dead, a well-known Mexican tradition. Here's how its founder describes race day.
It may sound cliche, but you know, we say it's one giant party, it's one giant fiesta. As soon as you arrive, you hear music, whether it be through our DJ, Jesse El Granote, playing, you know, house music or, you know, merengue, Spanish music, or you hear mariachi, you hear folkloric dancers, you hear Aztec dancers, you know, getting the runners ready. The race kicks off at 8. You go at it and you run through beautiful, you know, Pilsen, which, you know, is you know, I can't argue it's the best neighborhood in Chicago. I think us as Latinos, we look at death, which for some people may come across as very morbid and very dark, and you know, it's truly sad losing a loved one, but why not flip it and celebrate their life, right? And so Dia de los Muertos to me is that it's a time to remember, you know, someone truly special in your life. Sometimes initially folks think is that like Mexican Halloween? And you know, we tell them that, you know, it's far from it. Since, you know, the start of the race, which is 2007, you can't deny the growth of Dia de los Muertos across not only Chicago, but across the country, which to me is truly beautiful. Sometimes you see runners wearing shirts with pictures and images of their loved ones. They'll write messages, this is for you, Ma, this is for you, Tita, you know, and I think that's, you know, very special. And every time I see that, like, it just, it instantly gets to me. You know, Dia de los Muertos, it is a combination of both, you know, our pre-Hispanic roots as a culture, but also our Catholic roots as a culture. But without one or the other, Dia de los Muertos does not happen. And so what we decided to do this year in the design is incorporate the pre-Hispanic roots that we have.
I love El Dia de los Muertos, and the celebration doesn't end at the finish line. There's a post-race celebration with tamales, pozole, crafts from local artisans, and more. For more information, you can visit our website. And that's our show tonight. Join us tomorrow night at 5:30 and 7 for the Weekend Review. Now, from all of us here at Chicago Tonight, Latino Voices, I'm Joanna Hernandez. Stay healthy and safe. Good night.
Closed captioning is made possible by Robert A. Clifford and Clifford Law Offices, a Chicago personal injury and wrongful death firm whose attorneys embrace a culture of philanthropy and service by volunteering their time, expertise, and guidance to help others in the greater Chicago community.